Alright, so today's lesson, we're going to review the distributive property, which we've done quite a bit, but then we're going to use the distributive property to learn how to factor some algebraic expressions. And we're going to start just with the distributive property as a little review and really talk about what factors are. And factoring is not hard. You just have to remember what a factor is. So as a little review, our mental math, we learned at the beginning of the school year a way to multiply 8 times 19 without having to go through and set up our little 19 times 8 and then multiply and all that. And so what we did, we broke this down into place value and said, well, that 1 is in the tens place, so that's really 10 plus 9, just the expanded form that we learned probably back in about first or second grade. And so then we said, well, I'm going to distribute, I'm going to multiply this 8 times 10, and then I'm going to multiply the 8 times the 9, and I'm going to add them together. So let's do that much. So we're going to say 8 times 10 plus 8 times 9, so that 8 has been distributed or multiplied times both of these terms. Remember, terms are just split up by an addition symbol or a plus sign. So now we're going to multiply those, so that'll be 80 plus 72. And then it was a lot easier for us to add 80 and 72, which would be 152. So that's just our little review. Now, the thing that we want to look at is the fact that here, when I take 8 times 10, when I multiply 8 times 10, those are called factors, and when I multiply those factors together, I get a product. So these are both factors of 80. And we could actually factor 80 down even smaller into lowest common, or our least factors. I didn't mean to say it like that, but factor it down into all primes is what I meant to say. And same thing here, our product 72, well, we get that by multiplying the factor 8 and 9. And 8 is a common factor of both of these because we distributed it in. All right, so then our next example, examples number 2 and 3, we'll look at those together. So this time, use the distributive property to simplify. Same thing as we did up here, except that we've got 2 terms already. We didn't have to come up with those 2 terms ourselves. And this is more algebraic. Well, it is algebraic because we have a variable involved. But we're going to do the same thing. We're going to take 5 times the first term, and then we're going to say plus 5 times the second term. So that's going to be 5 times x plus 5 times 4. And 5 times x, all we can do is write that as 5x. We can take the dot out. But we don't know what x is, so we can't do any more than that. And then 5 times 4 is 20. Now up here, 5 and x are factors. And they give us this product, 5x. And over here, in this term, 5 and 4 are also factors. And they give us this product, 20. So 5 is the common factor. Well, we knew that because we just distributed it in and multiplied it times both of those terms. Okay, now over here we have 3 terms. And I'm going to change this minus 3 into plus a negative 3. As I've told you, especially with algebra, that's the best thing to do. So we're going to take negative 6 times m plus negative 6. We're distributing it now to the v. Plus, now we're going to take negative 6 times negative 3. All right, so we can take the dot out here and just say that's negative 6m plus, take the dot out there, which you can hardly see anyway, negative 6b plus, and then negative 6 times negative 3 is positive 18. So in our final answer, we can change this plus and negative back into minus. So we have negative 6m minus 6b plus 18. Our factors up here, negative 6 and m, product right there. Factors negative 6 and v, product right there. Factors negative 6 and negative 3. Product right here, positive 18. All right, so example number 4. Now it says to find the common factors. So what we're going to do is we're just going to look at this mathematical statement right here. And this is now going to look like our final answer when we use the distributive property multiply in. And all we have to do is look at this and say, what would our common factor be? What would be the factors here? Well, it would be 7 and A, 7 times A, plus 7 times B. Well, the only thing that's common to these two terms is the 7, so 7 is the common factor. Now in example number 5, we've got 3 times x, so I'm going to write that 3 dot x, plus we've got 7 dot x, and we can see we have a common factor here of x, so common factor is x. What both of these terms have in common, the x. And when you break down or factor down a product into its factors, then you can find a common factor. Okay, so then number 6, same thing. Okay, so we have 3 times A times B. So I'm just going to write that, 3 dot A dot B, plus. Now notice here we've got 6 times A times C. Well, I'm going to factor this 6 down into 3 times 2 times A times C. Because right now, in these two terms, I will have a common factor of 3 and a common factor of A. Well, let's see what happens. What would they have in common with all 3 of these? If I factor 12, well, I could factor that down into 3 times 4. Now I have a 3 in both of these, so that's a common factor. Then I also have an A and a D. Well, so I have a common factor of 3 and an A, 3 and an A, and a 3 and an A. So my common factor between this term, this middle term, and this last term, remember terms are between the plus signs, my common factor would be 3A, because I have a 3 and an A common to all 3 of those. Okay, so now that we can identify common factors, now we're going to actually just factor them out. We're going to actually do the distributive property backwards and take the common factor and go backwards and bring it back out in front of the parenthesis. So we can see if this is factored down, that means the negative 6 would be the common factor that we distributed in. Okay, so let's see how that works. So now we have 7, 8, and 9. Let's look at 7 first. Okay, so it says, let's factor the following using the distributive property. And we're using the distributive property backwards from the way we know it. We've learned it where we distribute in. Now we're going to divide back out if we do the distributive property backwards, because the distributive property means we're multiplying all the terms, and if we're going to factor out the common factor, we're going to divide it back out. All right, so here we've got a common factor of 2. So 2 is our common factor. So that is what was distributed in to the two terms, 2x and 2y. So we're going to divide the 2 out. And if we divide it out of this first term, 2x divided by 2, that's 2 right here, is x. Plus, now we're going to divide this 2 out of this term, and all we'll have left is y. So we're dividing the common factor back out because when we distribute, we multiply that factor in. Multiply that factor in. Now we're just going backwards and dividing that common factor out. All right, so just think of it as the distributive property in reverse. So now we have a common factor of x. So x is our common factor. So we're going to divide that x out of both terms. So we're going to divide an x out of this term. Here's the x we're dividing out here. So we'll have 3 left when we divide x out of 3x. Plus, if we divide x out of 7x, we'll have a 7 left. Now, over here we could not add the x and y because we didn't know what they were. But here we have a 3 and a 7. So we can go ahead and add those and say that's x times 10. And by the commutative property, normally we put the number first. We call that the coefficient when we're down to a number and a letter. So I'm just going to use the commutative property and say that's 10x. So right here, I used the commutative property, whoops, C-O-M-M-U-T-A-T-I-V-E property of multiplication. Because I had two things I was multiplying together, which means I can switch them. Okay, last one, common factor. Well, let's factor this 12y, or xyz. I could factor that down into 2 times 6 times xyz, plus my next term, I could divide a 2 out of 10x, so that's going to be 2 times 5 times xy, plus I can factor 4 down into 2 times 2y. So I've got a 2 common to all three of these terms, and I have a y common to all three of these terms. So I can factor out a common factor of 2y. When I factor it out, I'm dividing it out. So I'm dividing the 2 out and the y out. So I'm left with 6xz plus, divide the 2 and the y out here, and I'm left with 5x plus, divide the 2 and the y out here, and all I'm left with is the 2. So when I factor out a common factor, it's 2y times the quantity 6xz plus 5x plus 2. And if I wanted to check to see that that was right, I could distribute it back in to all three terms, and I should get this back again, which I would. All right, if you want to review any of this, you can go back and rewind, and we'll see you tomorrow. And when you come in class tomorrow, how about you... let me think here. How about you bring me let me think. Give me one of your prize tickets that has your name on it. And if you do that, I will give you back an extra prize ticket. Okay, so bring me a prize ticket with your name on it. If you don't have one, if you spent them all in the the last prize drawing or in the silent auction, then just put your name down on a piece of paper and say, this is my prize ticket. All right, see you tomorrow.